Dear friends and colleagues, welcome to Prelude, an interview series about opera produced for educational purposes by Atelier d'Excellence. The current episode is supported by Operawire. Operawire editor-in-chief David Salazar participates today as a guest interviewer. Today's episode is hosting world-renowned conductor and opera coach committed to the globalization of operatic training, Professor Kamal Khan. Welcome, Maestro.
Welcome, Kamal.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
We're really excited to have you and to discuss so many interesting things with you, Maestro. I would like to pass to the first question, which belongs to a very good friend and mentee of you in the past, Mr. Sunny Boyd Lavla, my colleague in AdE. Hello, Sunny Boyd.
Hello. Thank you so much, Kamal, again. It feels so good to talk to you in this kind of set, not being in the in the room working. So, and again, it means a lot that you decided to join us today. Really, thank you.
Thank you. I'm very happy.
I guess I will ask my first question. How did your musical journey begin? I know that you initially trained as a pianist and also a violinist. What urged you to turn into conducting as well?
Well, my musical training started from two different sides of my family. You know, my father was Indian, and he came to America as an adult and for his studies in 1950. And my mother, her side of the family, American, German background, going way back, a lot of really intense amateur musicians. And the first thing I thought of was conducting. My mother would sing in a choir that sang with orchestra once a year. Their big projects were with the Arlington Symphony in Virginia. And I was fascinated by that guy who was leading, waving the stick and getting something to happen. And they did The Creation when I was 3. And I don't remember too much about it, but they say I watched it a lot. Then they did a concert version of AIDA when I was 4. And that, I remember every note of, every minute of. I got to go along to some rehearsals, and the theatricality of the music made an incredible impression on an impressionable 4-year-old. And so I never really thought, I thought of conducting way back to then, but the next year when they played the Missa Solemnis, I heard that beautiful violin solo in the Benedictus, and I said, I want violin lessons. I want to do what that man is doing. And we took me to a violin teacher, a wonderful woman named Charlotte Barrand, and she figured out in the first lesson that I had absolute pitch. And she immediately said to my mother, he needs piano lessons too. And it sort of went from there, and all of the instrumental, and then later on I sang and all of that, it all sort of moved towards conducting, although I wasn't so aware of it at the time. And that inevitability to the whole circuit.
I also wanted to mention that I know that you can sing, and so many people don't know that you can sing. And so when we work together, it's like when you open your mouth, I'm like, oh my God, what's going on? Is he singing for me? Can you tell us more about your singing journey as well? How long did you start when you were young?
Well, it's a very interesting thing, and it's taught me a lot pedagogically what I went through. We don't just learn from our successes. We learn from everything. Yeah. And okay, I had this wonderful violin teacher, Charlotte Barron. She was something else. And a very fine piano teacher. All my early mentors were women. I was going to say, to a man, they were all women. Yeah. And it was so helpful. And so my first teacher, Ruth Haycock, really encouraged my love of music. But she wasn't a tyrant about hours practiced, And I said, do people play all of their scales every day? He's like, oh, some people do. And so you start to think, okay, maybe I could. Then I went to a piano teacher in high school. This other piano teacher developed a detached retina, and she didn't have the energy and focus to teach me. So when I was in high school, I went to someone who straight out said, practice 4 to 6 hours a day or I won't teach you. Mm-hmm. And that was the time for that, because I was 14, 15 years old. And if I didn't get serious, it was never going to be anything. Yeah. But in those early years, I spent a lot of time at the piano playing opera scores, playing the piano accompaniments to violin pieces I was playing, just sort of playing anything. And I'm grateful that I had that. Then I went off to college to be a singer, and I went to be a singer because I had a bigger scholarship than I would have had to be a pianist. And I thought, because my voice matured very early, I thought, okay, this is what I want to do. And I discovered that the singing training business is not like the instrumental training business where people respect the information you come to them with. A lot of the singing training business, I hope it's improving, is about making people feel disempowered and making them feel that whatever they came in with must be wrong, even though it was good enough to get a huge scholarship and to win all these national competitions, but it must be wrong. And when you're a kid, you don't think how backwards that is.
Yeah.
You know, my voice got worse and worse over the 4 years of my undergraduate, and I always thought it had to be my fault. But I was still the same person who sang very well as a high schooler. I hadn't changed.
Yeah.
Eventually, then your confidence ebbs. And at this point, it was suggested by the dean of the school I was at, you play for all of the singers around and you play better for them than a lot of the accompanying majors. Why don't you do a degree in vocal accompanying while your voice matures? He also had a particular teacher he wanted to take me to who wasn't at the school. Unfortunately, he passed away the summer after he told me this, so I never got to meet that teacher. So the voice was kind of put on ice. But I got very involved in accompanying. But when I moved into accompanying, it was meant to be a temporary thing while my voice developed. And then I got offers to start working in opera companies as a pianist and a coach. And so the temporary became longer and longer and longer. And I'm still sort of waiting to get back to singing.
Oh, wow. Awesome.
David.
Yes. So you just talked a lot about your mentors as a young boy and then teenager and then into your years in college. But once you're out of college and out in the professional world and you go from being an accompanist to a conductor, who are some of the mentors that had a really big impact on you, and what are the big lessons you learned from them?
Thanks, David. That's a good question. In the last years, my last 2 years of conservatory, there were two women that were hugely helpful to me. One is a French pianist and coach named Gaët Sergei, who really, she was the first person who was demanding enough of me as a pianist in terms of musical matters. I didn't realize it, but everything she was showing me was the skills that I was going to need when I started working at the Met. She was the only person who talked about certain textures and sounds and accompaniment figures that were about to become what Maestro Levine was obsessed with for the next 10 years. And I had a preview because Gaët was asking that very high level of work. Then every Friday and Saturday and Sunday for 2 years, 10 a.m. to 7 p.m., I sat on the bench at Marlena Malas's. And I learned the whole vocal literature playing for this extraordinary woman's major voice teacher, and warm, deep spirit really helped me a lot to prepare. Then I got to the Met, and suddenly I was in there playing rehearsals, coachings, all of that stuff for Maestro Levine, also meeting Nello Santi in those years. That was the other person who I think really just sort of like got my attention. Also Eduardo Müller, who was fabulous. Oh, wow. And, you know, the approach to music making, the idea that the singers could be comfortable and the orchestra could have integrity and the drama could have flow all at the same time, based on a lot of very practical common sense decisions. That's what I mostly remember from Jimmy. That was very, very valuable. Later on, I met Julius Rudel during that time, but we didn't get a chance to work much. But when I was working as resident conductor and he was principal guest conductor in Palm Beach Opera, we really took charge of professionalizing a lot of the elements in the company, and he really made me feel confident in my own abilities, because when a man with the competence and the quality of Julius Rudel tells you that you're doing the right thing, you believe it. You know, question him. Also before him, Anton Guadagno, because Guadagno brought me down to Palm Beach. And there was something about getting the confidence of these old timers that made you realize there's no games here. There's no psychological motivation. These are just actual professional musicians who've been conducting for years, who are treating you like a younger colleague as opposed to like a kid or a functionary. You know, they're actually asking you, how does this seem to you? How does that seem? And they're giving you very respectful feedback on your own work. So those two guys made an enormous difference. Also, the conductor Franco Ferraris, who I think is known to most people now because he conducted a lot of albums of Corelli and Freni, their aria albums. But he was my conducting teacher in Italy, and he was the first person to make the comment about leaving full-time coaching and going into conducting as well. He said, you can do it. We had a lesson on Ballo e Maschera, and I remember he said, you can do it. If you don't do it, it'll be because you didn't want to. And sometimes you need that nudge in order to really get out there and take certain kinds of risks.
So it's really great that you had all these old school mentors, Kamal.
I did, but I also want to thank two gentlemen that are very much out there and conducting now, Eugene Cohn and John Fiore. Because they both were very helpful, opportunities, advice. If they saw me, John said something about directionality of beat in terms of conducting in a repertory house situation that was incredibly helpful to me, because no one had said that before. If you grow up at the Met, everything functions at such a high level. You don't see conductors doing a certain kind of cleanliness because the orchestra just knows the piece and everything just sort of melds. And it was very helpful to get a bit of that from him. And Eugene was fantastic, gave me some of my first opportunities to conduct in Puerto Rico, which I've always loved going there, and I'm very grateful to him for that.
So Kamal, you always, I remember when we were at school, you always talk highly about Maestro Nello Santi, about how he conducts from memory and everything. How did that influence you? Because you have that ability as well of conducting and playing everything from memory. Did he input that in you?
No, we actually discovered it. This is a funny story. He was conducting Luisa Miller at the Met, and I was playing Luisa Miller rehearsals. And Pavarotti was the, what's the name of the tenor?
Rodolfo.
Yes.
Rodolfo.
Rodolfo. And we had a musical rehearsal in 203. It was supposed to be for 2 hours to do everything, because he hadn't been there and he hadn't been there, as these things happen. And he didn't show for that rehearsal either. And Maestro Santi turned to me and said, "Caro Maestro, what else are you playing this year?" He asked, what else was I working on? And I had my first go at Chenier coming up that year, actually with Julius, with Rudel conducting, but we hadn't gotten to it yet later. And I said, I'm doing my first Chenier. I would love to go through any of it with you that you wanted to, but we didn't have our scores with us. So I just started from memory, and we basically worked through the whole opera. Those 2 hours that Luciano didn't choose to use were to my benefit. And I played through the whole thing, and he would sing all the parts, and he would he would passeranno ed io ti mostrerò, the portamento, and there's Italo Taio. He would do all the phrasings that various great singers had done as we were playing the whole thing. And at one point in just the part of the Merveilleuse enter, he stopped and he said, "Dove siamo?" And for a minute I thought, has he lost his mind? We're in room 203. He wanted to know if I had memorized the rehearsal numbers. I said, no, I haven't. He said, "Quindici." And then on we went. But I got the sense that Chenier's that season with him helping me to learn it or giving me that input, and then with Rudel actually conducting, it was really a wonderful experience. And when I did my first Chenier, it was a Einsprung, and Marco Armigliato did the beginning of the run, and he had to leave to go conduct the 3 tenors, so I just walked in and did one. And I was so grateful to have both a generous colleague like Marco preceding me, and to have been formed on that piece by Maestro Santi and by Julius. It was really, I didn't feel alone in the pit.
Fantastic.
So thank you very much, Maestro. My next question goes now a bit to the mentoring dimension you have. You combine an active conducting career at the greatest stages of the world with a passionate commitment to mentoring younger and more established opera singers. I would like to ask, how do you fulfill your artistic mission through those two activities, and which one gives you more satisfaction?
That's hard to say, because if you can make them happen at the same time, and you can be conducting people in concert or in a performance who you remember hearing in high school gyms, who you remember hearing at Saxe or Old Mutual competitions in South Africa, something like that, to be with those same people on stages in Europe, in the US, whatever, that's sort of the trifecta. That's hitting all the points, because you're creating art, you're working with people that you've mentored, and you're still involved in their development. One of the great things that I learned watching several of these conductors is that a conductor is fundamentally a teacher. because everyone in there knows how to play the music. What they don't know until you tell them is when. And their idea of when is subject to the fact that you have the experience with the singer. And so you've got a little bit more of the specific information than there's time for them to gather on their own. In an ideal world, every musician would come to every musical rehearsal, and to conduct the performance, I could just fold my elbows and they would remember everything they ever heard Pretty or Nadine or Sonny Boy or Michael or whoever sing. But that's not how it works, unfortunately. The reason the conductor is the center of this communication system is because we have more information. Not necessarily that we've studied harder and longer, although many of us have devoted ourselves to a certain segment of the repertoire, the operatic repertoire, and so maybe we've gone in a little bit deeper than someone who has to play opera and symphony and ballet and jazz and whatever else. So when you can get contentment in all three at once, that's what you shoot for. I have to say the mentoring and the teaching is a very special joy, because you never know when it's going to come back to you positively. And one young singer can be having a real tough time and not getting through things. And you're thinking, what am I failing to explain? Or what do I maybe not see that these other people are not seeing? And just at that moment when you're thinking, oh, what is going on and what is wrong? You'll get a call and it's like, oh, watch my streaming of blah, blah, blah. And you put it in and he remembered everything. And it's great. So usually the repay of the mentoring is, it's sort of the opposite of playing whack-a-mole. You get one problem down and one springs up. In this case, it's usually something good springs up in another corner, because some of these seeds get planted years and years ago.
Yeah. Just to add on that, Kamal, I remember when we first did our Viaggio Arrange, which was done for the first, which was the premiere then that UCT in collaboration with Cape Town Opera did. I remember I was really struggling with all the corretturos going high, and you kept on telling me, just stay there. Just keep on doing it every day. And what I took from you, and I loved it so much, what I love about you, honestly, is that you have this gift of understanding what the voice that I have, what the singer can give. And I think this is such a special thing that everybody should just really look at it, that you can be a good conductor and all that, but if you don't understand the voice, because I think this is why you produce so many singers in South Africa, because you seem to understood every voice and you knew all the tricks, what voice can do what and why. How did you get that? Is that because you started singing as well, or?
That's so generous of you to say. That's what I hope to do when I conduct. And I think that a lot of it is, I learned it from the experience of not having what I showed up at conservatory with, not having that respected. I learned that if you try, thank goodness nobody tried to make Kyrie Takanawa into another Maria Callas. We certainly wouldn't have had a second Callas, but we also wouldn't have had a first Takanawa.
Exactly.
And I've got to say, this was just something I had a sense of as a student, but not much of a sense of, because still I was sure that I would have been, that was why the voice went off. But I noticed that Jimmy was very good at this, Levine. And he even had a respect for, sometimes when he would talk to me about how he wanted the covers prepared, and what he really liked was when a cover went in a show that you had prepared, and they were distinctive, as in they weren't trying to imitate the principal, but they were distinctive in a way that was still conductable. They were distinctive within certain boundaries, And I think that was part of my training. How is the best, if you have a baritone who's almost a bass baritone, singing Carlos Gerard in Chenier, and his cover is a very elegant lyric baritone, a guy who's maybe like singing what I think of as being a bit Technica Kraus, singing very raccolto, and it's like, how am I going to prepare this other guy to walk into a performance for a big McNeil style singer and still show his qualities? And so I think I learned to be creative under those circumstances, and coming to Africa and hearing so many people whose basic vocalita was so right for the literature that I was able to cast for in those years. Then it was mostly, I hope, a question of giving people confidence in their vocal instincts and giving them musical guidelines, because that was the nature, I think central to the drama of South African singers and central to the whole. I believe that opera and the Western art forms in general really represent the best things about Western culture. And my belief is partially shaped by how many people from other cultures want to be a part of Western opera. And they want this before they know that you can make a lot of money doing it. And let's be realistic, compared to pop singers, you don't make a lot of money doing it. Luciano's best year wasn't as good as Madonna's worst year, probably. And let's be realistic. If people are chasing fame and fortune, they're not going into Mozart.
Yeah.
Then I think, what is there so special that makes those kids in a gym in Nuclaza or Fezeka, what is making them want to make this music that means so much to me? And what can I do with my life to tell them, hang on, I understand who you are in this sense. I may not understand everything you've lived through, but we share this thing, the Santo Dio. Think about how many kids in Africa can sing that section so beautifully. And I'm convinced also from my work in China, from Dominican Republic, all these places I go, there's a lot of people that are not ready to throw in the towel on Mozart and Verdi and Shakespeare because they come from the same culture as the atomic bomb and colonization. There's a lot of people who do not connect those phenomena, and I think they're correct to not connect it. And I ask that those young people get some respect and get some support. And in my life, that's what I try to do.
I'm really glad to see that you are a part of the community that doesn't share his own ambition. You love the singers, you care for them, and that's so rare, and we need it so much. That's why you have these results, because you do it with love. It's not only your incredible knowledge and level, but also your love. This is what I'm getting.
Well, there's like I said, there's nothing more wonderful than when they really get it. That moment when you see one of your students, and I can be conducting or not conducting. I could be in Europe at recording sessions for someone that I work with, and when you see the orchestra responding so well to someone's first take at a recording session, when you see an Italian orchestra hearing a foreigner singing Italian repertoire, and that you just see them relax. They know it's not going to be one of those. The next 10 days or next 6 days aren't going to be one of these horrible experiences where someone's not in the style, not in the language, not caring. It's very gratifying to see those guys, like the flutist recording a Lucia cadenza, to see that he's happy and trying to do his best because of the young lady he's singing it with. When you get approval from the inside.
Awesome. Actually, I've seen you, Kamal, in Zurich. I don't know if you can remember when Nadine was singing Lucia with Nello Santi, and I was there as well. I saw how glowing you were to see Nadine doing her beautiful singing Lucia on stage and Nello Santi conducting. It was just really something magical. And I did that production actually before Nadine, which was awesome. And it was so good to just see you happy, and really just to emphasize that you do really care, and you just want to see everybody happy. That's a good thing that we can.
I remember we hoped you would get to sing in that production too that time. You were there. And the other thing was, Lucia, this had come up for Nadine. I don't think she'd mind my saying, this had come up as a question in December of the previous year. Could you go into Zurich and do it? So she was home on a break. I was already back from South Africa for Christmas. So down to Florida I went, and we had a good look at it, and we worked on it. I said, this actually could work. Because before, everything had been Mozart.
Yeah.
We hadn't done so much bel canto, but I knew way back when she was a young teenager, she had studied a lot of the cantilenas from the bel canto repertoire with no thought necessarily of these being roles she would do, but she certainly knew their vocalità, she knew the ins and outs of them. And we realized, okay, this could be special. And as soon as I knew that Maestro Santi was going to be conducting it, I was also wonderful, because he will always he said to her, "Ti darò mia formula. I'll give you my formula." And he was very much, if it's Edgardo, it's like one of them with a portamento, one of them without. I mean, there were rules.
Yeah.
That's great for a young singer. I think Pretty Yende had the same thing with Bonning in South Africa. Yeah. These great old timers really, I loved when I could prepare a singer well enough that they were able to walk through the door and really hear what one of these gentlemen would say. And the fact that their partnerships with them went so well could only have made me very happy. And it was great for me to see Maestro Santi again that week, because I hadn't seen him for years, and it meant a great deal to me that he felt comfortable that I had prepared her, and so now he could just move right in and do his thing.
Awesome.
David?
So you touched on it a lot, I think. I was going to ask you a lot about what the key to working with singers is, but I want to know if you could elaborate a little bit on what your collaborative process is when you're conducting an opera and you're bringing in this, the challenge of bringing an opera together is there's so many elements that you just have to coalesce into one whole. What's your process for working with singers, and how much input do you allow them in terms of tempi, other musical aspects of when you're putting work together?
That's also a really interesting question that increasingly depends upon circumstance. Sometimes if you've got, let me think, how would I describe this? If you're doing the last thing I did before lockdown, the last complete opera, because I did a concert in Florida after that, but the last complete opera I did before lockdown was a concert version of Don Carlo, Italian 4-act version, but no cuts within that, a full old-fashioned Don Carlo, with my wonderful colleague and friend Cesar Wonenberger, the Opera de Galicia. And this was with Ferruccio Furlanetto and Francesco Biogalosso, Angela Mead, Elena Zhigkova, and Carlos Alvarez and Luis Octavio Faria. So it was a really, really fine cast. It was Angela's first Elisabetta, but she was certainly very well prepared, and everybody else had done their roles many times, so not even a question. And you do need people's input because you don't know how long it's going to take. I think it's always a question of how long it takes a voice to speak in a certain context. If your approach is very bel canto, for example, the short note at the end of a bar always tends to be a part of the next phrase. If you applauso pianto m'avrian dal tuo memore cor. The 16th note really belongs to the next note. And that's a phrasing that really comes from Mozart. Another person who was hugely helpful to me early in my career, hugely enlightening about coaching, was a man named Stephen Lord. And Stephen Lord said to me once, don't let him sing long to short, make him sing short to long. And I thought, okay, that's worth 6 months of what I learned in my undergraduate in that one sentence. So, but if you're dealing with someone whose vocalità comes to Verdi more from the standpoint of verismo, if they're a little bit beefier, they may need more time to settle that 16th note than I conceived of looking at that passage as, here's Verdi writing in Paris, influenced by Meyerbeer, who was influenced by Rossini, Seria. It's always with a score, which direction are you looking at it from? Are you looking at from what comes before, what comes next? The composers only knew what goes before. But the answer still isn't always what goes before, because sometimes they intuited, there's a school of thought that says great composers shut doors, they don't open them, because a great composer finishes saying everything that can be said in a certain idiom. And that's a very old-fashioned viewpoint. In the era of Bellini, Donizetti, Rossini, originality in itself was not considered to be a primary virtue. Skill, beauty, balance, all of those kinds of things came before originality. And then we got, with Wagner and even with Verdi, and the desire to find something new. His way of having slightly lukewarm praise for libretto, Verdi, was to say it had situations which, while not exactly new, were nevertheless very beautiful. So you figure out backwards that Verdi was perhaps looking to create new things. He said, in Don Carlo, I had the intention of revolutionizing theaters. So back to the example of that Don Carlo, I only had my first rehearsal with Ferruccio just, I'd already had two orchestra readings before Furlanetto and I sat down at the piano. So if you know them, and I had met him before in New York, and I mean his work is of course pretty legendary. It's not hard to know about his work, but to get inside and make it happen, you eventually develop the kind of physical technique as a conductor that makes it pretty easy to turn on a dime. That makes it as much as possible, you're creating it along with the singer instead of a certain kind of aggression in the preparation and the Auftakt that leaves people feeling that they've got no choice but to put it there, whether or not that's what their breath or their body or their tongue or their larynx or their vowels or their whatever is telling them to. So that how you conduct and where you allow in orchestra rehearsals before you've met the singers, where you allow them to have the awareness that there could be flexibility is important. I'm lucky that I can also sing in my orchestra rehearsals alone with the orchestra, and they can hear where the timings are going to be, where the stretches are going to be. And that's something, Maestro Santi was never shy about that. And also a few other Italian gentlemen really sort of showed me that, don't be afraid to use your voice in rehearsals. Use all the tools necessary to create this atmosphere where we are asking people to get into a time capsule back to 1830 or 1910 or whatever. We're asking people to make a trip with us, and as immersive as the experience can be as possible for everybody is the best way.
Jumping on that time capsule concept that you just brought up, what do you find the most challenging repertory to perform or conduct for you personally?
Well, I've got to say, when the singers are right, none. You know, the difficulty, I suppose, could be if someone who really ought to be singing Lucia has been cast as Turandot, or if someone who, but even then, that those 10 years at the Met sort of prepared me to look at the upsides that someone brings to the table. Difficult repertoire to conduct does tend now often to be the repertoire which our current system of training has not given us so many singers that are idiomatic in. Around my second or third year at the Met, Maestro Levine said something really interesting. We were in the middle of rehearsals. I think Idomeneo was rehearsing and Ballo was rehearsing. And he made the comment that he could think of 4 or 5. We had almost 2 or 3 really good different casts of Idomeneo because there was the Autumn and then the broadcast revival. And he said he could think of 4 or 5 good casts for Idomeneo, and that when he had been a student, that didn't exist. There wasn't the depth of bench for a Mozart opera seria. But that when he was a kid, you had 4 or 5 good casts for an Aida or a Ballo, and it had become much harder to cast those pieces. I hope some things about the way we train singers are already moving in such a direction that that's less the case. One of the main things we could do to make Verdi and Wagner, but let's stick to Verdi for the moment. One of the main things we could do to make Verdi easier to conduct is allowing kids with Verdi voices to keep doing competitions up till age 34. I'm just going to put that out there. Especially with the years being lost in the training of COVID, I am eagerly waiting to see which competitions are going to raise their age limits for the next 2 years. We're watching, we're taking notes. My colleagues at Opera for Peace and my colleagues at Classical Vocal Arts International both share these concerns about age and singers. And we're narrowing the passageway, and then we're bemoaning that we don't have the kind of singing we would have if we wouldn't narrow the passageway. And hopefully this year of relative, I won't say cessation, but where the nature of our activity has changed, has given everybody a chance to think about the logical paradox we've created, and hopefully, like the practical people that many people in opera are, to undo what I think is a mistake.
Thank you for that, Maestro.
You're welcome.
If I may now go back to mentoring and all this.
We can't hear.
I hear you.
We can hear Yanis anyway.
Okay, so maybe it's me. Sorry.
Okay,
Forgive me.
perfect. Yeah, it has been so inspiring just listening to you describing it. So I imagine how this process is even more inspiring for singers. But I just wanted to highlight, and I wanted your opinion on the importance of diction in this training, because we have a lot of singers who are watching this, and I'm sure that they are all concerned about that.
This is very crucial because actors don't act with only vowels. Actors act with words. At the same time, it is the vowel that carries the musical content of a phrase into the theater 95% of the time. What I was really the most pleased about, Sonny Boy, the years that I was in South Africa, and then Bongiwe and Lucanio went up, and of course, Pretty. What kept coming back was how impressed and surprised everyone was at the quality of the diction that everybody had. Now, why that should have been a surprise could say some unpleasant things about cultural suppositions that maybe we can talk about later. But since it was acting in your favor, I saw no reason to complain at all. Probably the most important thing about diction is if it's more physical work to pronounce in a foreign language than it is in your home language, something about the way you've learned the foreign language is not going to be there for you when you're singing. I find even now in the era of Zoom, this kind of coaching is easy to do. If I see somebody having saltro che lagrime per lui non tenti, I am very concerned that when they sing, that's what I'm going to hear. And if I say, no, say that for me in Mandarin, say that for me in Spanish, say that for me in Isicosa, and I see their mouth behaving perfectly, and their face looks like the face of an Italian newscaster reading the Italian news, I don't have to doubt that their diction teaching has been lacking. See, diction is often taught as how far apart do I need to make these sounds? And unfortunately, great singing from Tosi through Garcia, through Lamperti, through Venard, through the great teachers of today, which we do have some, all of that is about lining up your vowels. So whose job is it to build the bridge between the hyper-articulated, deliberately uneven positioning of vowels so that it's understood? And I think English diction is often the worst taught in this respect. And when I was a kid, it was really worst taught, but a very, very wonderful woman, Dr. Catherine Leboeuf, who's at Juilliard, has really changed and made English a beautifully taught singing language for so many people now. But that didn't exist so much before. Diction is about clarity. Lyric diction is about clarity with beautiful singing.
I must say, Janice, during my school days with Kamal and Professor Kopato at University of Cape Town, they made us translate word by word in English, from Italian to English, English to Zulu. So in that sense, I think people were shocked when we came this side having this kind of diction, because we were really, even today, Judith is always asking me, what are you doing? I'm like, I have to translate. I'm doing Cosia. I have to translate from Italian to English, English to my language and speak it. In this way, then it's easier to act and understand what is going on. And so I really Kamal is really a dictionary of music, really. Honestly, it has all these tricks to manipulate your mind and show you that it is possible. And I think that is why you have so many South Africans coming up now under his direction in Cape Town with this. We all have the passion for it, the love for it, and which is rare to find. And to have somebody like him giving that to us, it's really absolutely was a fantastic gift, I must say.
Thank you. I think what can create, nothing can kill passion faster than this notion of it's a very distant art form for you. Whether you say that to somebody because of their ethnicity, of their race, of their age, sexual orientation, gender identification.
Yeah.
As years go by, we realize there have been more and more tools placed. I don't want to say tools, that makes them sound constructive. More and more barriers placed between people with a passion for singing and singing. You know, some of it is the don't sing anything that's too heavy for you, don't sing anything that's too heavy for you, only sing Mozart, only sing Mozart. If you have a certain kind of voice, Mozart is a jacket that's too tight. You know, wonderful friend of mine, a very, very fine teacher, Trish McCaffrey, made years ago that comment in a New York Times interview that said, for some voices, Mozart's the worst thing you can give them. And people raised their eyebrows through the ceiling that someone would say this. But it's notes on a paper. The name of the composer doesn't necessarily make it easier or softer on the throat. You know, to take a tenor whose natural voice is an almost baritone sound and force him for Mozart. Well, so sometimes you diagnose them as baritones and they spend 5 years singing very good papageno until they're ready to go up. And that's the safer option. Being in the wrong Fach is safer than being in the right Fach before you're ready.
Yeah.
Because the other solution is to try to shoehorn them into una hora amorosa. And if they're deeply musical people, you know, there's that old video of Jonas Kaufmann singing Una hora amorosa. It's okay, he's so musical. Of course, it's great. But it wasn't his real voice. And he would, I'm sure, say something to that effect now. Or it wasn't the full fruition of his voice. And it was probably harder work than singing Cavaradossi.
Yeah.
So you've got to be a little bit willing to swim against the current when you hear a singer with great talent and a specific kind of talent.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Just to add on that, again, I remember when we did the Flying Dutchman, you only had students as a chorus, just to show you guys what Kamal does, which is magical. It was only students, young kids from high school, secondary school. And then you had me as a Steuermann. Kamal, really, I even till today, I really thank you for guiding me to sing that role, because Sidwell, my teacher then, said to me, you're not ready to sing Steuermann. You can say yes to it. Just because Kamal is conducting, if you're going to listen and sing with your voice, it's okay. But you guided us, and I felt so protected. I could try anything, because you always say, if you sing it with your voice, don't try to make it big than it should be. Sing it with your voice. And these are the things that I think we're missing in our days. And everybody expected to do that. The next person, if they hear that person sings like this, they want you to do. And I feel so inspired when I work with somebody who just try to challenge me with the instrument that I have. And so for so many singers, it's quite confusing these days, because you never know where you stand, because you want to please the people. Well, and sometimes I don't know. It's just so difficult to place yourself in a place where you feel like, okay, I'm safe.
There's what role can I sing, which is what it's really my job to help you guys figure out.
Yeah.
What is my vocality for this piece? Then there's, you know, the problem with you singing Steuermann is not Steuermann. The problem is you singing Steuermann with a little more slancho in your voice than perhaps an old but very light tenor. And so you've got the fire of youth going on in there, and so perhaps a little bit more juiciness, a little bit more Italian quality in it. And somebody says, oh, I'm doing an original instruments Fidelio. That would be wonderful in my Florestan. It's those kinds of things. And how many wonderful young African singers who have I heard who can sing the last 5 minutes of Florestan really well with their basically Italianate voices? Because, you know, the ending of Fidelio was a choral competition staple in South Africa. I don't think anybody with me would know that, Sonny Boy. But, you know, there's Wer ein Holdes Weib errungen. You can walk into any choir in Soweto or in Kailicha or Guguletu, and everybody knows Fidelio. You know, I wish you could say the same about any choir in Fort Wayne, Indiana, or, you know, Opelika, Florida. But at any rate, there's nothing about the notes of these pieces that are dangerous. You know, anybody with a good, solid bel canto technique can probably sing Desdemona in Otello. That's what Verdi expected. Wagner wanted Garcia, the younger, to come train singers for Bayreuth. Wagner expected none of the composers we perform all the time could realistically have imagined a world full of singers who can't trill. They expected the bel canto technique would always be there. even, Brunhilde has to trill, Isolde has to trill. These things can't be avoided. And I'm glad that I have a lot of colleagues now in teaching and in writing who are starting to raise a lot of awareness about this. The era when recorded sound was invented was when the vocality necessary to sing the big verismo pieces and Wagner and Strauss was really the dominant vocality. So it doesn't necessarily mean we had such direct connections to how a voice like yours, Sonny Boy, a bel canto voice, could go in the other literature. I think what you have discovered is your Rossini and Mozart schooling leads you just fine to Britain.
Yes.
Schooling on Britain does not necessarily have that same diving into the stream comfortable feeling when they go to sing their first bel canto pieces.
Yeah, so true. So true. Yeah.
That's fantastic. And because we've been talking about the South Africa, your years there as a professor at the University of Cape Town, and how many talents you've nurtured. I would like to know a bit more, any experiences that you working with them. I mean, you've already shared quite a few, but mostly how this culture encouraged those people to turn into opera and pursue in such a high level.
Well, I am sure Sonny Boy could answer the question more profoundly than I can. I can answer it.
I give you my
I first came in 1997, and I went to conduct Lucia because this was basically the period of which I realized that I could be very busy my whole life, coaching, playing rehearsals, cover conducting at the Met, or I could get out and actually conduct. And so I elected to get out with Maestro Ferraris's words in my head about if you don't do it, it'll be because you didn't want to. I elected to accept this invitation from South Africa. Lo and behold, I get down there, and it turns out Maestro Ferraris used to conduct there. So it was this strange feeling that, like, some of the markings in the players' scores for the Lucia, especially where to have Gran Casa e Piatti, where not to have and stuff, were his markings, and I could kind of feel the way he thought about such matters in the way that they played. He's a highly theatrical conductor, loved extremes. So this was my first time, and I really enjoyed it. The last day of that first trip, Angelo Gobbato, who is really, there should be a separate word for mentors who are also friends, who are also colleagues, who are also brothers, and that is Angelo. I have no higher praise for anyone in the business than for that man. So he was my stage director for the Lucia, and we sort of had this routine going where at the end of every trip he would say, "Oh, the budget for next year is very bad. I'm not sure what we'll be able to manage, but I'll call you if I can, and I do hope we'll get something to work." And I come back the next year and they're doing 8 operas. He knew how to make opera out of nothing and make it great and make it work. And there was nowhere you would rather be than working with Angelo Gobbato. And so after that year, at the end of the Lucia, the last performance was a Saturday. They were always that way at that point. The last performance was a Saturday evening, and that Saturday afternoon, I went out to college, saw college for the first time, really, and gave a master class in the room that would later be the room that I taught opera class in every day. And some wonderful young singers were there. Maria Justa was there. Simpiwe Clavana was there. Angela Gilbert was there. And I was thinking, I think Maria Justa sang Porge Amor for me. I think Angela sang Porte Lui. Simpiwe might have sung, it didn't matter. It was great. I knew Simpiwe already. Oh, that's a different story. Anyway, I got the sense that it was going to be an interesting place for me. I already knew Simpiwe, I should point out, because he was in the chorus for the Lucia. Or maybe that was the next year during the normal. One year when he was in the chorus, he came to me and said, "Maestro, can you help me? I have to learn this recitativo from Nozze di Figaro. Ma voi non tocca stare in pena per questo," the one at the beginning of the second act. And so we spent a lot of time working on it together, and I used whatever devices I had. I didn't so much know about the Speak It in Vernac stuff that I learned later watching Angelo, but I had some ideas. So we had lovely sessions, and he did very well. And I said to Angelo, "This kid is really marvelous. I enjoyed it so much." And Angelo started laughing and said, "Of course, their assignment was to see how far they could get on their own." I had been played. And then so I became very fond of Symphony, and he and Luzuko was, of course, up in Nuremberg still. And I remember preparing them to sing Pearl Fisher's duet with orchestra in different concerts. And they were, I mean, there was just a lot of passion and a lot of talent. And so the work with the kids got, I don't want to say it got more and more central, because, of course, I came down there to conduct. But it started being more the magnet that kept drawing me back. I think the first show I conducted at the college wasn't Our Nozze, Sonny. It was at Salve Flöte before that. Were you in the chorus?
It was Salve Flöte. I was in the chorus. That was my first year.
That's right. I remember Given was in the chorus for that.
Yes. Yeah.
It was a wonderful show. I mean, Noborumko and Pelista. I mean, they were great voices. And all of these people, it's like, as I'm saying their names, these are people who, over the course of the next 20 years after that, either on the tours with Porgy and Bess, on the tours of Brett Bailey's Macbeth, on tours with Mark Dornford May's company, or on tours with Kentridge, have sung in all kinds of international theaters all over the world. I mean, you look at the number, the high success rate from that university before I got there, while I was there, just overall. I'm happy if the competition's got an uptick buzz from my being there, but there have been many young singers from there who have gone on to do extraordinary amounts and kinds of singing all over the world. And really, that didn't exist much under the old government. How would it have existed much? And I'm very glad that we've seen this change. And of course, I'd like to see it grow. I'm now visiting professor at the at Northwest University in Potchefstroom, and that's unfortunately had to be pretty much all online since the day the appointment happened. But I'm very eager. Supposed to return to Cape Town actually in June, and I'm hoping to Potch in July. Yeah. And I can't wait, because hearing a voice live,
it's something else.
You can do work with a voice that you know live online at a certain profundity. But if you meet them online, every so often there might be something so obvious staring me in the face that I'm not seeing or hearing. And when you see them live, you find it. Because we all know the phenomenon of voices that record more dramatic than they are. You know, if you just heard their recordings, you would maybe think that Björling had a bigger voice than Gigi, but everyone who saw them live tells you it was definitely the contrary. Yeah. Because the texture of a voice records a certain way. It's the same thing with teaching online. And I have great admiration for everybody that's generating all this online content. Yeah. But it isn't the whole story. It can't be. I don't think anybody thinks it is. We need to be back in theaters.
Yeah. So Kamal, I was about to ask you if do you see yourself going back to South Africa for full time at some point, or it's I mean, where are you with that?
It's hard to say. I would never rule anything out. Because South Africa is a place where I know I could make a tremendous difference. Yeah. Now, we have to acknowledge that because of Zoom, we have learned that you can do a lot of teaching and coaching and mentoring online. I mean, the possibility has been there. I remember when the kids went up and did the Belvedere competition. Yeah. Over the years, how every year it got a little easier to get the performance on the internet. Yeah. Like, I know the year that Pretty was doing it, no, that was Operawire. That my Wi-Fi dropped out just in the cadenza between the two verses of the the Beatrice, and it's like, did she go up to the E or not? Did she go up to the E or not? I had to call and ask her afterwards, and I was able to. I think the year that Klengiwa took second in the Belvedere, Marcha and Aller Aachen, I was able. That was the first time I was able to see an aria from beginning to end, from the Belvedere to my studio. And so it started to get easier and easier. And by the time Levy was doing it, the technology was functioning so well that I could just click right in. And so now we've gotten so much further with the technology. We're so much more used to it that being physically based in South Africa may not be necessary in order to have a profound effect on people's lives. I think a lot of going back and forth always will be. But part of what I was able to do when I was at UCT was the first few years there were a lot of people involved in running the college that understood that sometimes I needed to be back in the Northern Hemisphere to help open doors for people. You know, all of our young singers went to Glimmerglass to be a part of Lost in the Stars. I came back up here during their time at Glimmerglass. You know, there has to be a good deal of physical reminding people who is down in South Africa. You know, hopefully it won't happen so much now, but in those days you could just kind of forget.
Yeah.
Who of singers who's ever in front of you. And
exactly.
if I come back and forth, if I see people in a lobby at the Met on my 2 weeks home or something, you know, shortly during that time, I remember the same time I came home to see the kids up at Glimmerglass, I was walking from the Met. I had been there to give, I think, Riyab Khayab coaching, and I was walking back up and walking by a restaurant, walking by Café Luxembourg. I see Placido Domingo coming out, and he's like, "Ah, yes, she was so wonderful." Immediately talking about Pretty, because I think she had just won the belt. Said, "She was so wonderful. Do you have any more?" Sometimes you need to be home.
Yeah,
I wasn't going to have that contact with Placido walking down the street in Johannesburg or Cape Town.
Yeah, that's so
you
true.
know, and everyone wants to be helpful, certainly.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's that physical experience of seeing someone at just the right time while they're looking for somebody that can make a difference.
Since we're talking about the physical experience, I mean, I remember Nadine when she was young, she flew to Cape Town to work with you, and we were all fascinated. We were all like, "Oh my God, this girl, what are you doing in South Africa?" And then she gave us an answer. "No, I came to work with Kamal just for coachings." And we all we were like frozen, because it was the first time we had a singer from all the way from America to come and work just for coachings, prepare for competitions with Kamal. Now we were like, "Did you fly all the way to come just for coachings?" She said, "Yes, because it's been with me since I was in the beginning." I didn't understand it then, but now let me tell you, boy, I understand. It is so important to keep the person that understands you well vocally. And I think for so many singers who are listening here, Kamal, you can talk a little bit about that, how important it is to keep the same people who know you from the beginning, even though I know that we can go around and hop around, but what is your take on keeping the same foundation that you started with from the beginning?
This is very important, because the people that know you first perceive a problem developing before anyone else does. One thing that was always super important to me, in addition to mentors, we have our brothers and sisters in the business, and the heaviest loss of the last 18 months was Nolofefe Mchabe.
Yeah.
And Nolofefe was preeminent choir mistress in South Africa. She had an eye for spotting young talent, young solo talent like nobody else. And so many of the really wonderful singers I worked with over the years from the university that are now singing abroad and wherever came through her choir. And she was the one who would go backstage if a 14-year-old thought they had messed up and go back and dry their tears and tell them, "Listen, I'm telling you, you got it." And her ears of what would happen to the kids that she had known as adolescents, what she would hear happening with their voices as they developed in UCT, was always of great importance to me. Always. And some people at the university really discouraged their students from maintaining their contacts with the choirs they came through. And my feelings about that were very different. I think I angered a few people.
Yes,
but
my teacher too.
was, no, I want to know what Mr. Matthews thinks has happened to the voice of one of his people at UCT. Because Mr. Matthews knew that voice before I did.
Yeah.
I want to know what Sidron Mlongo thinks. I want to know, because they're all musicians. And I think the hierarchical structure of who's a professor and who's a this and who's a that has nothing to do with what those first ears who heard you heard in you. So we can expand our team, but it's great to have a nucleus.
Yeah.
Of voices that always knew you. You know, in the case of Nadine, she had won the Metropolitan Opera auditions, so she had some money and she had competitions coming up, and she had Merla, and it was eventually going to be Adler Fellow coming up. So there was lots going on, and it was good for her to just check in. And I mean, of course, I was grateful to her for coming down, and we had a marvelous time. Her only visit to South Africa as of yet. We shall see.
Yeah. Awesome.
Also, I think it awakened people. So often, young singers think you coach for a role rather than you coach all your life. You study all your life. And obviously, you don't want to study all your life with someone who every day is invalidating everything you showed up with. It needs to be part of some kind of a process that's directed and organized, responsible. And it helps a young singer if they can see the people organizing their process have helped other people organize their processes successfully.
Yeah. And also, Kamal, we've talked about singers going around shopping everywhere, which means hopping around teachers. Can you explain, because we have so many of these singers who are coming to us asking which teacher is good for me. We are mostly in a position where we cannot tell what teacher is good for you. So how can you talk about how can they decide what is good for them?
This is a tough thing. Lotta Lehmann used to say, if you want the right voice teacher, pray. The shopping thing has probably gotten really intense since the internet, because you can go online and just sort of pick people's brains. And I mean, when someone comes to me for an online coaching, it never occurs to me to ask, are you planning on staying?
Yeah.
It's not, it's in the one sense, teaching and coaching is a commercial enterprise. And if I buy a jacket at the Gap this week, I'm committed to going back to the Gap every time I need a new jacket. So I respect people for wanting to come and pick what they want. And every so often I'll work with someone a few sessions and I'll see a streaming or video of something they've done. And I'll be like, I see. So she really grooved on what I said to her about X, Y, and Z. And she either couldn't assimilate or didn't agree with what I said about A, B, and C. Sometimes it's very clear what you were able to give them and what you didn't. But sometimes people will come back later and say, it was really fascinating and I had too much on my plate. This was not a time to accept more. Now let's try to do some more stuff. And I think grown-up singers, adult singers in career, absolutely, if they want to do that kind of thing, they should. I coach some singers that have got like 3 or 4 voice teachers. And it's my job to help them synthesize, to pull out the common thread, because maybe a singer will be, well, this teacher says A and this teacher says B. And I'll be like, yes, but I noticed that within the bounds of what they're both saying, there's this certain activity that needs to be happening, or in some cases needs to be curtailed. So for professionals, it's one thing. Students in a school have to deal with the ethics and the ethical guidelines of that school. And if they really need information that they're not getting in that school, they got to leave that school ultimately.
Yeah.
Just within the bounds of what's really ethical. Kids that have just gotten out of school but haven't really hit steady employment. And I mean, this past year, to have 3 jobs is to have steady employment. But people who haven't quite transitioned into full professionals, that's the spot where gathering your team is tricky. If in school you had a teacher that really helped you, perhaps that teacher becomes a part of your team. But of course, people want to look at other teachers more information. A lot of the singers that are giving guidance online are fabulous. The Zen thing of the finger pointing at the moon. They can really guide people in that sense. But they're very busy professional singers and aren't necessarily starting to create a business as a teacher. It's got to be an individual case what the right teacher for somebody is. There are certain teachers that do really well with certain Fox. Every so often I hear someone who's just missing a certain piece and I think be so great with that particular teacher. The old Italian thing tended to be that men should study with men and women should study with women.
Yeah.
There were exceptions like Campo Galliani, who was really a coach and a pianist who became a voice teacher. So he had great students that were both male and female. But generally, it was a highly gendered, highly Fach-dependent thing. I think there's a certain truth to it. I think every man needs to study with a man at some point in their training. and every woman needs to study with a woman at some point in their training. But they don't necessarily have to be long pieces. Sometimes it's like you get one piece of information, and once you've got that, it will assimilate into the rest of your system, and on you go.
Yeah. What is your take on master classes?
Ooh, I don't know. I can kind of enjoy doing them.
Sorry?
If I'm doing a master class with a singer and a pianist, I mean, there's the sort of master class that a singer and a pianist, they're both students at that institution, and you're dealing with music that is equal partnership between the singer and the piano, which in a way everything is, but it's easier to define that as like doing a master class on lead or melody or English or American or Spanish language art song or something like that. Then I think it's quite useful because you're really giving a master class on the song.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're giving a master class on Schubert's Ganymede and they don't know who Ganymede was and they don't know who Zeus is, okay, at least you know how you're about to spend the next 15 minutes of your life retelling them something they could have looked up in a book. But you do it because it's a master class and because they're not your regular students. It wasn't like they should have already known anything.
Exactly.
And it's interesting to broaden, you know, again, continuing with the example of Ganymede, it has one of the greatest tempo varieties of established performers of almost any song I know.
Mm-hmm.
And you early on, all of your tempo structure has to be to a certain extent built upon, do you think liebender Vater has to be in one breath or not? If your belief is that must be in one breath, every tempo choice you make has got to land you at the tempo in which you can sing that in one breath. If you believe that it doesn't, you have different kind of flexibility and the whole thing can be more expansive. So these kinds of interpretive questions can be interestingly dealt with master classes. When I was a student, the master classes that I really remember, Dalton Baldwin, God rest his soul, so empowering. It was a bit like my experiences with Maestro Rudel and with Guadagno and with a few other people. When Dalton told you you had done something, you knew you had, because look what he had done with his life and look at the level he made music.
Yeah.
And conversely, I remember once he said, "What happened to that beautiful tone you had last year at the first master class in the fall?" And I was like, "Oh my God, how am I playing?" Yeah, what it was Nachtzauber of Wolf, Susan Graham. And as soon as he said it, I was like, "Oh, okay." And I started to get it a little bit more fluid because but I mean, how wonderful was that to do Wolf Nachtzauber with Susan Graham for Dalton Baldwin in school? How bloody wonderful. So of course, master classes are great. You know, Tom Grubb's master class, I did Schumann, Mondnacht with Dawn Upshaw. I mean, as a kid, we were all kids. But I love master classes for song. Master classes for opera, then I kind of want to know, is it a class for both the pianist and the singer? What do we want? If it's a master class in audition technique, which I think is a good thing to have, I'm interested to be a part of it, but I want someone who's an agent. Actually, I want Lewis Ehlers. I want Kathy Olson. I want Matthew Horner. I want an agent involved because they see more auditions than I do.
Yeah.
So it's different things for different kinds of master classes. I never turn them down, but it's always good to know what it's really for.
Yeah.
Great.
I'm just gonna drop another question, which is completely out. I know that you've played recitals with so many big singers, and you've also been involved in their professional recordings. My question is, do you enjoy doing that kind of job more than being in the CD section? How does it go? How is the process? How does the process go?
It's really interesting. The recital aspect, just before everything came to a crashing halt, like at the end of 2019, I was starting this organization called Classical Vocal Arts International. And I think David was at our first concert. It was Michael Fabiano and Nadine Sierra. And we were doing it as sort of the launch for Classical Vocal Arts International and also to raise funds for Michael's Art Smart, which is a really...
I remember that very, very clearly.
our goal was that we were going to do a couple of these per year because many singers, I don't want to say many singers have a charity, but many singers have a passion that involves some sort of community uplift. And these singers have enough of a following that perhaps they can fill up Merkin Hall with people who are going to buy a ticket, and the money goes to that. There aren't as many vocal recitals in New York, especially the level of people singing opera in big houses, as there were when I was a student. I think of the recitals I used to hear. I mean, I heard Shirley Verrett do an all Brahms recital at the 92nd Street Y that I will never forget. Pat Monotralis did an amazing recital there with Martin Katz the same year. Chris Alou and Vinta Reiser with Jimmy the same year. Håkan Hagegard and Warren Jones at Carnegie Hall. I mean, there was so much of it. And some of the reasons there aren't might not be the kind of thing that I can do anything about, but some of them I think we can. And Classical Vocal Arts International, very much about what it's like to hear real voices singing repertoire that is meant to be heard with piano in a live acoustical setting. Part of why we have tried to create a whole lot of online stuff is because it isn't really the same.
Yep.
Actually reproducing voices through mechanical means, it has to be done, but I'm looking forward to when we're able to get back to doing live recitals. So in terms of me and playing recitals, of course, it's a huge satisfaction. I love to play the piano. I've had lots of time to practice over this break, as you can imagine. And it's a great thing to do. I have some stuff coming up in the fall that if it doesn't get canceled, I'm very looking forward to. The sitting in the control room for recordings thing is wonderful and taxing and exhausting. And I think it's very good for the singers that coach with me, because the next 3 weeks in their coachings, all we do is talk intonation.
Yes.
But, oh my God, when you're in the control room, suddenly everything is intonation. And I hope, all seriousness, that I carry that with me more than 3 weeks. I think there's the abstracts and the concretes in singing. And the reality, of course, is if you get I'm pointing to my computer screen, imagining, the record producers, they have everything on their screens. And they can show you where the wave is, and they can show you where the pitch ought to be. And we see that nothing is ever perfectly in tune, including the singing of our great, great, great forebearers. There's not a single happy piece that communicates its emotion well that doesn't involve a little bit of sharp singing. And there's not a single lament that doesn't have the occasional tone that pulls a little lower than it really should, a little, just in this certain kind of proportion. And rarely is the best take and the most perfect take, rarely do those two factors coincide. And we've had wonderful, there's Jakob Kamal, who's a great, great record producer who I've been involved in a couple of them with. And when you have a real partnership with a great producer in the booth, and then you can make clear what they're saying to the singer in 5 words that might have otherwise had to be 50. The other reason I like being in these recording sessions with people that I've coached a lot and that I know well is I can be extremely blunt, extremely to the point, maybe even some trick phrases that only we understand, and it just happens. Yeah. And so it's fun because then the atmosphere is more relaxed. The atmosphere is, otherwise recording sessions get very tense, very tense. People want to do it so perfectly, but they don't have the feedback of the audience, which I think is the natural filtering system for a performer's emotions.
Yeah. Cool. Maria.
We can pass, I think, to another issue, which is the globalization of operatic training, which is a kind of mission for you throughout your life. You haven't worked only with South African singers, you have also worked with singers in the Dominican Republic, and you are a founding member of Opera for Peace, an organization which aims to develop the art form of opera in all the countries of the world. So, do you believe that opera has frontiers, and why this passion for opera exists even in the most remote areas of this world? And also, what do you believe that nations have to benefit from promoting operatic education, musical education?
That's a very deep set of questions. I'm going to start by saying that I never questioned my relationship to Beethoven or Verdi or Wagner. People could look at my name, Kamal Khan, and absolutely question, and have absolutely questioned What does this guy know about it? You know, not just that my father was Indian, but he didn't come from a Western chamber music culture. You know, Maestro Mehta came from an extraordinarily, from the Farsi community in Mumbai, where there was already a Western symphony, and he came from that chamber music tradition. My father was an Indian Muslim from Uttar Pradesh, a very different sort of sociological relationship to a lot of things about Western culture. And yet, he never doubted my interest. He supported my interest. My parents both did. And I didn't think too much as a kid about the fact that I wasn't seeing anybody like me. Growing up in the Washington area, there were lots of kids of diplomats, so maybe people just figured I was one of those. I don't know. It did become an issue a bit later on. You know, when I was a conservatory student, in my second phase of studies as an accompanist, the then president of the school also was the general director of a major summer opera company. And everyone said, oh, audition for him, you'll get a job there. Your first job in the business should be there because you're coming from the same school. He had a reputation for only hiring blondes and Anglos and the whole white prep school crowd. And I played a great audition for him. I didn't get the job. I didn't give it too much thought. It didn't occur to me to put it down to prejudice and racism. And I really didn't care too much because I got a job offer from the Met the same year and Opera Theatre of St. Louis the same year. So I was sort of off and running. And it was like, But sometimes I think in those days when we had incidents like that happened, we were encouraged to put them behind us without processing them. We were encouraged not to stress on them because heaven knows you didn't want to be accused of being negative. And you didn't want to be perhaps, and then all of the cliches that would go along with whatever ethnicity you are would be applied to you. And so you deliberately put it aside, put it out of mind. When I started conducting, it had a couple moments. There was a singer who was very loyal to me in one rehearsal in Spain commented that she heard one of the orchestra members say, "Que Taliban," about me. And I thought, you know, but what? I had also great relationships in that same orchestra, and the show came out great. I had re-engagements there. So what am I going to do? Fixate upon one person? No. Am I going to deny that prejudice happened? That would be improper. If I deny it, I'm also invalidating other people's experiences. So, you know, there's part of why I'm passionate about the globalization of music is because I think if I belong, so does everybody else. You know, a young tenor from South Africa, a young tenor from China doesn't have to be any better than Luciano Pavarotti to have a career. But I want everybody to be as good as Luciano, so I'm in there, you know. That was a greatness of singing that you really felt like you were in the presence of divine intervention when he was singing. It was just like you felt like you were standing in the way of gold light or something. I feel horrendous for the kids that never heard that voice live. It was just miraculous. And I think that mystical aspect of what it's like to be around great singing, young people are hungry for that. The young people that come to opera, who are the numerical minority even in South Africa. It's the second highest leisure activity after football, I'm told, in South Africa. I think Mandisinde first gave me that statistic, or Sibusiswa Njeza. And I believe that it's true. But even a fringe interest, even if there's just a fringe of us all over the world, that adds up to a lot of people who have something beautiful in common with people they've never met, with people who they don't share the same first language, with people with whom they don't share the same religion. See, I think things like languages and religion and nationality, they certainly have elements that are more divisive than cohesive. They really do. I'm not saying religion is wrong. I'm not saying that we should all have no passports, although maybe we should. But my point about this is that we have other areas of understanding with each other that are not explored, that some governments encourage and some governments don't. Because not everybody wants everyone holding hands and singing Kumbaya. Yeah. Everybody holds hands and sings Kumbaya, they'll discover that the same hands are in all of their pockets. You know, I think it's as simple as that sometimes. If you get people talking to each other and making music together and understanding each other, they're going to keep talking to each other after the rehearsal. And they may discover that they have more in common, and that could be real trouble for politicians that want to keep them divided.
Yeah.
You know, one of my non-mentors, but he is a great hero of mine, I've just never met him, Maestro Daniel Barenboim. I'm very happy that he likes some of my students very much. But Barenboim founded that orchestra on the basis of the people that talk together will keep talking together and that there will be some dialogue. And I think I was always feeling that I was acting in his spirit with the work that I'm doing around with all of these places. It's just an extraordinary vision of what music should be. And I also think it's great that that vision is accompanied by very high standards. I think anybody that only heard Maestro Barenboim's speeches about politics would then get a real shock when they see the intensity of the demand of what you're expected to produce in rehearsal. But this is important too. We show our love for each other by showing our love for the art form that we all have in common. Opera is a family. And like in lots of families, voices get raised.
Yeah.
As long as everyone feels they have a voice, there should be no compunction about occasionally raising them.
Yeah.
Very nice. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well,
and another question about this is, do you think that translating the libretto in each country's language would help spread opera better in these remote areas of the world?
I think some of it is very interesting. Opera for Peace has a wonderful initiative about Middle Eastern opera that I encourage people to go to their website and look more at. Opera in the original language, again, a historical perspective helps. Opera sung in the language of the composers, regardless of where it's being performed, is a phenomena that began in the 20th century. It has not characterized the art form. There are letters when the Opera of Paris wanted to do Otello in Italian in tribute to Verdi. Verdi was having none of it. He wrote Otello all'opera in Italien with like 4 punto interrogativos in his letter. He thought it was a disastrous idea to have all those French people trying to sing in Italian. He wanted to supervise the translation of the libretto, but he wanted it done in French. And I have, back in the other room, I have the score of the French Otello, where, again, when they made the translation, he also made some revisions in some of the ensembles, and he added the ballet music, which I think is actually the last music he wrote is the ballet music in Otello, because it was after Falstaff. So the composers wanted their works understood. If you look at the manuscript of Donizetti opera, I just had, thanks to IMSLP, now you can see all these things. I was just looking at a manuscript copy of Donizetti Torquato Tasso because I'm doing a program using some of it in this program I'm doing in Juilliard at the end of May. And it says drama, I think it's, oh my God, now I'm forgetting the librettist. I think it's Jacopo Ferretti was the librettist, I think. But it says drama per, and then there's the librettist's name. And then it says musica di Donizetti. So I think this is interesting. If you think that it was a drama of, then you would inevitably translate it. So I'm quite open-minded. My first job in opera, before the Met even, was Opera Theater of St. Louis. And the late Colin Graham was the artistic director there. And I was very, very much of a Colin fan. And they did everything in English. It was his version of ENO for America. Mm-hmm. And, this damn Red Sea is enough to freeze your fingers off. Don't ask me why when I go down the avenue, Clichy, the men can't keep their eyes off me. I mean, they weren't literal translations. And this, I think, is important. When Sonny Boy was talking about how Angelo and I asked for different kinds of translations, the singer needs to translate it literally to know which sound they're making carries which part of the meaning. But then you'd better have a translation into your own vernacular. Now, for the South African kids, or if it's a Chinese singer, it's relatively straightforward because the vernacular will be a language that I don't share with them. But I find even American singers need to have in their own vernacular. The last time I was doing a program, Juilliard, was 2017, and we had the duet of Maffio and Gennaro from Teresa Borgia. And there was one thing I couldn't get the mezzo doing Maffio to give me what I felt was a believable expression in her voice. She's a beautiful singer. And I was remarking, I said, but how would you say that? And afterwards, my husband said to me, you know, you asked that question. These days, the kids don't say it. They text it. And I got fascinated by the idea of certain phrases, certain che dici, che ascolto. That's really an emoji. Your vernacular translation to those is that, because it says it all. There is the level at which, however you're translating the word, what it means in your solar plexus, in your body. If you say the words fame, hunger, they may not have the same reaction to you depending upon your relationship to the Italian language or the English language. You know, my dad always said that Urdu was the language in which he counted, in which he prayed, and in which he cursed. And you've got to have the libretto translated into the language in which you count, pray, and curse for me to believe you on stage in it. When you've got enough people that all count, curse, and pray in the same language, it's a good idea to give them the standard operatic repertoire in that language at least sometimes. Patrick Ticolo, wonderful colleague from UCT, has made some translations like that, I know. And I hope in South Africa there'll be more of them. I hope every place does more of them. It's not an area that I'm equipped to open the doors on, as I don't speak those languages, but I certainly believe that some of that is important. Nothing replaces the experience of the original language, on the other hand, but diversity of experience means sometimes in translation, sometimes in the original.
I absolutely do agree with you, and I do believe that since I've moved to Germany, I had no German in the beginning, so I had to study German. And when I sing in German, it's much easier because I can translate some of the. I can understand what is going on. Mm-hmm. Of course, there are some difficult words that I need to go and look at the dictionary and translate. But it's much easier to sing. It's less work for me to do, and I believe that now I'm learning to polish my Italian a little bit. It's also becoming more natural for me because I'm studying così, and I'm like, oh, I just studied that. Oh, now that means that. But there are some old words that you need to go to the dictionary and translate. And I think it does help that if you don't speak the language, translate it in English and in your language. Or if then it's easier for you to study directly speaking the language. And I think you, Kamal, coming to UCT, you emphasize so much in having languages as the major deal, because you were pushing so many singers to go to upper campus to study Italian, German, and French. And I really admire that about you, because it helped really when you know the languages. Would you say to singers who don't speak the languages, they should pursue learning the languages rather than learning how to translate?
That's a complicated distinction, because learning the languages is long ball. That's making a plan in the first inning of the baseball game so that at the seventh inning you haven't taken out your pitcher yet, so boom, you do it, and it's learning the languages is strategic. Learning the translation is actionable steps today to get up and sing Quanto bella, quanto cara.
Yeah.
So I kind of think both. There's an awful lot to this business of becoming a singer. And the academic work of translating per se got much easier when another figure very beloved to me in the business was a man named Nico Castell.
Yes.
And when Nico wrote all those books, he made the initial stages of preparation easier. And I wonder if he would think that was a good thing if he were still with us, because it's also made it possible for people to have someone else do the work for them and think they've done the work. You know, if you wake up on second base, you didn't hit a double. Yeah. It's all baseball today with me. Anyway, so I think it's important to translate, make use of the resources that are there, but to maintain a very open mind about what else could be learned by means that seem to be more indirect.
Yeah. I guess then I'll go to the last question. What is your advice to young singers who wishes to find their place in the opera world?
An open mind. Well, I'll go so far as to say it's summed up by the letters. I never thought about this way before, but honesty. Know exactly where you are. If someone tells you that's out of tune, lose no energy on saying, but I've, it's like, no. Listen to it. If you hear it too, be honest. Sometimes we get people whose coloratura is a bit shoddy, and you call them on it and say, what's the fourth note of that run? I'm not hearing the fourth note. And if they're going to if you're going to blow a lot of smoke and be very defensive about it, when someone is actually there to help you, heaven help us when it's somebody who has the power to not hire you. So the first is to be honest with where you are work-wise, what you're getting right, what you're not getting right. That leads us to being open-minded, listening to solutions. Like, okay, so maybe sometimes I always tell people, if you've got 2 career options, pick the one that will make you the most uncomfortable, because that's where you'll learn the more. It isn't necessarily like pick the role that will make you the most uncomfortable. You have a chance to sing Gilda or a chance to sing Brunhilde, sing Brunhilde. I don't mean that at all. But I mean open-mindedness, the big challenge. I could never live in X, Y, or Z. It's like, oh, but maybe you could. And you might learn more there than you will learn on your couch. So being open-minded when you get input, opportunities, pick the ones that challenge you. And that leads to the third, that leads to willingness. Once you're in there, try a little harder, not try a little harder coming from a place of, oh my God, I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
That doesn't help. But to be really willing to try these things, because you'll never know what's on the other side of that door if you don't try.
Oh my God, you just nailed it. With the breathing, I've been so challenged, because it's not, I mean, I put myself in a place where I needed to try new repertoire. And since you're saying that, this breathing taught me a lot. And really, it is so good to just try things until you know, because you never know until you try it. So,
yeah. It's also about trusting your team, the people that think you can do something. It's the story is that when Callas got offered Puritani, while she was in the middle of singing Brunhilde, she told herself, well, if Maestro Serafin, who is no fool, thinks I can do this, I would be very foolish to doubt that I can.
Yeah.
And there's a sense that that's part of what our mentors give us, part of what Maestro Rudel, part of what the experience with all these people is it builds up your ability to believe. Other people's belief in you cannot take the place of your belief in yourself. But other people's belief in you can certainly give you the rock bottom level of confidence to walk into a room full of people where you maybe don't know if they all believe in you, and say, it's okay. There's people I respect that believe that I belong here.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, thank you, Kamal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maestro. As we hear you speak, my thoughts, and I believe the others here share these thoughts, is that we really wish for every young artist to have a mentor like you. A mentor who will love, care with them, and will have also your caliber, your artistic caliber. It would be a blessing. And we would like to thank you from the bottoms of our hearts for being here today, sharing your experiences and your advice. And we want to wish you to be back on stage and be back live in the studios with the singers that you are helping very, very soon. That this pandemic will ease at some point and we will all be back to what we love most. And I have an invitation for you that you are free to refuse if you don't agree. But as I see you near the piano, we get very inspired to ask you to play something for our audience, if you feel so.
Oh, okay. Ooh.
Something little, because we have some great ladies of the opera like Nelly Mirichoiu, Pretty Yent, and some others also who are requesting that, if you may. So,
okay. I don't know if it'll be all over the thing. I don't even know what to play first. Brahms.
Yay!
Thank you very much.
What a great honor. What a great honor. Thank you so much, Kamal.
Thank you.
That was one of the greatest moments for Prelude in general, for our interview
Yes.
series. We are very grateful to you, and we wish that more people with your heart will come in the opera world and will help young artists develop.
Thank you. We hope to open the hearts of everyone already there too.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So thank you once more, Maestro. I would like to thank my wonderful colleagues here today who helped me do this interview with you. First, Sunny Boy, because he was the one who mediated to have you here today. So, Sunny Boy, thank you very much, and also for your to-the-point questions to the Maestro. David, our guest interviewer from Operawire, thank you very much for your support. Giannis Yiannopoulos, our AdE partner, thank you very much, Giannis. And all of you who attended today, and the great ladies of the opera, our mentees, our friends who participated with their wonderful comments and great energy. Thank you very much, and see you soon. See you soon. Stay healthy and creative.
Thank you, Maestro.
Thank you so much.
Stage.
Thank you, Maestro. Thank you,
See you
everybody.
soon.
See you.